Welcome, everyone. One of the ways I love describing our job as investigators is to reconstruct the most complete picture of an incident with the evidence we have. Sometimes we find ourselves in a position during an investigation missing a tiny piece of that puzzle. Finding that piece of the puzzle can make all the difference to the client as well as our investigation. So what we're going to be talking about today is a forensic artifact which has that same concept of puzzling pieces together. This artifact is known as the RDP Bitmap cache. It is by far my favorite forensic artifact, and in my opinion, probably one of the most underrated forensic artifacts. You're probably familiar with remote desktop protocol. It's widely used by system administrators to remotely manage systems within their environment. But with most legitimate tools, threat actors love them, and this is no different for RDP. Threat actors love RDP, and they often use it to laterally move within a Windows environment. Why exactly do they choose to use RDP? Well, sadly, there's probably no controls against the use of it in a compromised environment. That makes it a great way for threat actors to laterally move it in that environment. They don't have to bring any additional tools, and they can use it right then and there. This is where it starts to get interesting. When you connect to another computer using RDP, your local machine stores portions of that remote display during the session. This is called RDP Bitmap cache. You've probably guessed the reason behind this artifact. It's not actually for a forensic value. It's actually to improve the end user experience. We just happen to use it for its forensics value. Much like other cache solutions, it is to improve the overall end user experience. If your connection experiences some sort of lag or network issue, your client can reuse these cached images to improve your overall session experience. So let's start to visualize this. So on the left, we've got a remote display. In this case, this would be our remote desktop session. We can see some lighter blue colors and some gray colors as well. On the right, we can see our bitmap cache. Our bitmap cache is only storing those gray squares. So what's the excitement about this? If we take those gray squares and we use software to reconstruct the remote display, we get something to the right. Yes, there's question marks, and yes, it's not a complete view. But in some senses, we can reconstruct portions of what that threat actor was doing during that remote desktop session. There's a lot of value in this artifact. We are often coming into investigations into environments where there hasn't been a lot of thought around keeping forensic artifacts intact or the availability of forensic artifacts. So we might be limited in what we can see from traditional, forensic artifacts, and finding the remote display or something within that remote display can be very valuable. We might find things such as file transfer utilities, or even an exfiltration IP address if we're lucky. Yes, this isn't a complete view, must iterate that. It is not going to provide a full session recording, but it might provide some valuable hints, and in even some cases, it might provide a really useful artifact that might change the outcome of an investigation. Now that we have a good understanding on what the RDP Bitmap cache is, we can walk through an example scenario that might involve a bitmap cache. We know that a threat actor initiated an RDP session from this host, but we have very minimal other artifacts around any actions that they performed. This might or might not be the case, but for this scenario, we'll work with this. So we'll go through the process that we might use to collect the RDP bitmap cache, as well as any tools that can support in parsing and reconstructing that cache. The first thing that we want to talk about is the location of the RDP bitmap cache. We can see on my screen that I'm in a user profile under App Data, Local, Microsoft, Terminal Server Client, and then Cache. Within this directory, we can see two files, vcache, which is our mapping file, and cache. In this example, we're more interested in the cache file, which we'll copy across to another directory, which will act as our working directory for our scenario. Just want to note that there will more than likely be multiple cache files. Where this is the case, copy all of those files across. Our collection process can also be facilitated with tools such as Cape, which we won't be covering for now. Just for simplicity, we'll be copying these files directly and using the tools as required. The first tool we're going to use is known as BMC Tools, which was actually developed by the National Agency for Security and Information Systems out of France. This tool allows us to pass out the bitmap cache into those screen segments that we talked about before. The tool is a simple Python script, so ensure you have Python installed on your machine. Once we have downloaded the script from the GitHub page, we can launch PowerShell to input the relevant command line parameters. The first one is -s, which is the source. You may have seen beforehand I placed the cache file within a directory named cache. We're going to specify that as our source directory. The second is -d, which is the destination, which will create another directory called cache output. Once this is complete, we'll start the execution of the script. If we take a look in our cache output directory, we'll actually see those segments that we talked about earlier of the screen. They're quite small, but we can start to see this concept coming together. These are puzzle pieces, and we're going to start to reconstruct that session. And hopefully we'll be able to get some indication of what happened during this session. Now that we have the pieces of the puzzle, we need a, table in the sense, or a board that we can start to put those pieces together and build our puzzle. This introduces our next tool, RDP Cache Stitcher, this time developed by the Federal Office for Information Security out of Germany. It is absolutely amazing at stitching this together. It is also incredibly useful to save your progress as you stitch in that session together. We can see that board that RDP Cache Stitcher provides us. So we can create a new case, go into that cache output that we created beforehand using BMC Tools. And there we are presented with all of those screen segments. So let's start to piece together what actually happened during that session. Placing these pieces together, we can see that the threat actor was copying a file called threatactortoolkit.zip. Of note, that zip file is actually being copied to a user desktop under the name Bob. So that might be something that we should probably look at during our investigation. What were the actions performed by that user? It's always interesting having a look at a threat actor's toolkit. We can actually see that toolkit getting pieced together and common tools used by a threat actor. Things like netscan, procdump, psexec, sharenym, AD Explorer, even a bad.bat file. All tools commonly used by threat actors. As we continue, we can see a 7-zip command line that is compressing a network share from the system ENT-DCO1 with a network share named finance share. And it's compressing all of those contents to archive.7zip. Funnily enough, the threat actor actually used a password recorded as super secure password. Finally, we can see the logo that is from mega.nz, which is commonly used by threat actors actually to perform data exfiltration. So this is already pretty concerning. Within the screen segments though, we can actually see the username for that mega.nz account used by the threat actor. This is what I'm talking about before, where one of these pieces might actually change the ultimate investigation and the outcome for the client. In this case, where we maybe are able to identify that email address, we could issue a takedown to mega.nz. Obviously, the scenario was created in a testing environment to simulate what a threat actor might do in a compromised environment. It would be very rare for us to find as much information in the RDP Bitmap cache. After all, it's not a complete view, but it very well might be useful for an investigation. Ultimately, what I want to highlight is I encourage you to conduct an RDP session and see what you might get from that bitmap cache. Thank you very much for checking out my video, and I hope that the content was informative and you have a good understanding of what the RDP Bitmap cache is. Please reach out in the comment section if you have any questions or even topic ideas for future videos. Thanks again, appreciate it.